Okay, I don't know how useful this is going to be. My camera microphone is crappy, and but whatever. I'm trying. Okay, so I figured I would cycle through a few different transistors because this circuit in particular, pretty much all of the fuzz comes from Q3, the third transistor, because these bottom two, are a Darlington pair. Meaning their gain is kind of added together. They used to do that in the old days when they couldn't come up with one decent high gain transistor. They'd put two lower gain transistors together as a Darlington pair, and that would, they would, with some caveats, they kind of substitute for a single higher gain transistor. But that's just to get the signal up to the point where it can drive the third transistor into distortion, fuzz. So this is and I've written the specs for the various transistors. This is the one I picked for the pedal, HFE 106. This circuit depends on leakage, so I couldn't use any of the Russian transistors since they have 0.0 leakage, but this 2N527, has 0.30 milliamps of leakage, and that's good. I mean, closer to 0.5 would be good, but I had a hard time finding it because these are gold pin, high-spec transistors, and I should buy more crappy transistors, basically, if you like buzz-arounds. Okay, so, let's see, the buzz-around, I hear that as I should have actually written a script, huh? They call it a balance control on the Buzzaround. It's actually the bias for Q3. That's the volume control. This is the sustain control, which is the fuzz control, and then this is the bias, okay? So as you turn it down, the volume goes until finally the transistor turns off, right? But as you increase it, now see how linear it comes up? That's at full bias. And as you back it off, it's still very linear. Which is crazy, because usually with most transistors, at the low end, they kind of wheeze, they can't really perform. And then at the high end, they're getting too much voltage, and they start getting really splatty and poppy, And with these 527s are they're just really ballsy transistors, and so it performs basically the same throughout its bias range. Basically, it just gets a little more fuzzy and louder, obviously. But now, there's a timbre control on these too, which fades between two different input capacitors. I'm just going to crank that all the way up so that, because the bassy end of it is basically the bigger of the two input capacitors and has a wider frequency range. So for the purposes of testing these transistors, let's just hear a full bandwidth signal. Now then, this is my guitar volume. Okay, so the cool thing with simple fuzz pedals is that you back off the volume on your guitar and you get less fuzz. And here, really cool. It almost turns into an overdrive with just a little guitar volume backed off. Like, I really like that. So, yeah, just a little volume backed off. And you can keep doing that. And hear how linear? gain as you back off the volume control. Until there you start to really get a volume drop. But right to about there. And again, if I could crank the amp enough, this is a really nice preconditioner. But I can't because the camera will distort. Okay, so that's the 2N527, and hopefully I've kind of set you up for, you know, what you'll hear in the upcoming transistor swaps. But my point with the 527 was that it can get fairly ballsy, but it's very linear throughout its range. There's no point in setting the bias or backing off your guitar volume where it doesn't sound good, to me anyway. And again, this is with the volume on the guitar all the way up again. Which, you know, that's under full bias voltage. You back the bias voltage off a little. And still, you know, it's a thing that I love. The Buzzaround to me is the coolest of the fuzz pedals. Alright, so next. Alright, so here's a Black Glass OC75. HFE is 76, leakage of 0.34 milliamps. Okay, that's full bias voltage. Not nearly as bright as the 2N527. Can you hear how it's kind of farting a little as you reduce the... It's still relatively linear. I really should turn this up a little bit, but now I'm going to run my first demo. Okay, so back to full bias voltage, but here it just doesn't like life very much. Here, kind of ghosting and okay, and here's backing off the guitar volume. Hear that kind of wheezing on the decay? Yeah, it's still fairly linear. It's usable. But not as... Yeah, and hear that? It's a kind of ghost note thing. Yeah, just not as hearty as the 2N527. But still cool, and it's not overly bright, which is nice. You know, that's why people like me. Here's a transistor that I tend to like in just about everything. It's a Tesla 104 NU71. This particular one, obviously, as you can see, has an HFE of 79. These are never very high gain. And this, I had to look around a lot to find one with some real leakage, because most of them are like 0.08, 0.09. And this one pops up with 0.51, which is way higher than most of them I have. And, you know, makes it suitable for this pedal. Now this one is pretty nice. To me, I mean, it's not super bright like the 527. But like these, like I said, these transistors tend to sound great in everything. Okay, so that's bias voltage all the way up. But, you know, of course, it's a fairly low gain transistor. I mean, not low gain, like 30s or whatever, but, you know, they never crack 100, or usually never crack 100. Out of tune a little bit. I should have probably done that before starting this. But yeah, okay, so backing off. See, it's not misbehaving as bad as the OC75 did, but it's still obviously not as virile as the 2N527. Still pretty good. You know, it's not really farty on the decay. Not as linear, like I said, throughout its range as the 527. But pretty nice. I mean, pretty nice. Like I said, this is a favorite transistor of mine. Oh, you know what I forgot to do here? I did not sweep it through its bias range. And see, it's still fairly linear. It never gets to really wheezy or farty. Or splatty. Okay. So on to the next. Alright, and next up, an AC 128. HFE 106, leakage 0.51. Because you know. Whoa, I haven't got engaged. Because you can't have a fuzz test without an AC 128. But here, once again, we got some like ghosting and farty stuff. Overall, though, so that's full bias voltage. And again, fairly linear. Back up to full. Here's the guitar's volume. Very linear. So, yeah. You know, also a good choice. And not as bright as the 527. Yeah. Okay. And last but not least, a 2N598 with an extremely high gain. I don't use 598s in a lot of stuff because they're almost all really high gain. And again, it was hard finding one with any leakage. They're usually very, you know, like 07, 09, something like that. But these are very, very similar to the 527, only higher gain. As you bring up the bias voltage, like, it doesn't misbehave at all. There's no ghosting, there's no wheezing, no farting. Very, very linear. But again, a little overly bright. The 527s and the 598s, they both, in almost anything, they have more treble and more bass than you're used to hearing. And I don't think it's because they're particularly harsh. I think it's because, I mean, I'm guessing. I haven't done any kind of comprehensive test because I don't have really the equipment to do any kind of comprehensive test. But my guess is that they're good. Well, I think the warm transistors tend to be warm because they're crappy at reproducing high frequency content and low frequency content. They're not too farty or boomy or bassy because they're not reproducing a lot of the low end. Where these 527s and 598s are very hi-fi, and so they tend to be a little harsh. But again, when you back off the volume of the guitar, they get much more manageable. You know, you could probably build this pedal with a pot, an impedance pot on the front panel to drop. Or, you know, I'm doing all this with a humbucker. I should be doing it with a single coil. These are probably much less harsh sounding. If you're driving less signal into them, I'm using a hot PAF clone in my Junior. But yeah, turn the volume on the guitar down a little, and even this high gain 598 cleans up considerably. And again, it's a fuzz, but it sounds, you'd swear you're listening to an overdrive. You know, a kind of a woolly overdrive. But you bring it back up and it is a little harsh, just like the 527. So, there you go. You've heard a number of germanium transistors. I applaud anyone who managed to sit through all my babbling so far. And, you know, it gives you a good idea of what the Buzzaround circuit can sound like. love Buzzarounds. They have a sound. You know, it's not. It doesn't sound like most fuzzes. It sounds more like an overdrive. A fuzz that wanted to grow up and become an overdrive one day. Anyway, there you go.